The sun had barely broken through the dense clouds above the city skyline when two police officers slowed their cruiser to a crawl. On a nearly deserted street in South Baltimore, a tall black man stood motionless near the curb, his tattered coat pulled tightly around him despite the early spring warmth. One hand rested on a beat-up duffel bag. The other held a folded newspaper. He looked like just another homeless man lost to the noise of the world, but there was something in his posture, something still, watchful. The cruiser's lights flicked. On, sir? Everything okay here? The taller officer called out as he stepped onto the sidewalk, his hand resting casually, but not too casually, on his holster. The man didn't flinch. He turned slowly, raising his free hand without being asked. "Just reading," he said calmly, his voice deep, measured. His eyes, dark, alert, met the officer's without fear. The second cop approached, glancing at the duffel with suspicion. "You got ID?" The man nodded and reached into his coat with a deliberate slowness. What he pulled out wasn't a license. It was an old creased photo, faded but unmistakable. 3 men in uniform. One of them was him. Medals gleamed on his chest. The American flag billowed behind him like a crown. The officer took the photo, his brows knitting. "You served?" "Yeah," the man replied, eyes steady. "A long time ago." That moment, frozen in the silence that followed, felt like something shifted. The street, the city, the assumptions, they all paused. One of the officers muttered, "Wait a minute," as he stepped away and tapped something into his phone. What came up next would stop both men in their tracks. Not only had this man served, he was a decorated war hero. But more than that, his story, once front-page news, had been lost in the tides of time, buried beneath the weight of trauma, injustice, and years of living invisible. They had almost walked past him like everyone else. But now, his past was about to collide with the present, and nothing would ever be the same again. The man's name was Elijah Eli Turner, born in 1974 on the worn-down west side of Baltimore, an area where concrete outnumbered trees and sirens often sang louder than lullabies. His earliest memories weren't of family vacations or summer barbecues, but of his mother working 2 jobs just to keep the lights on, and of his older brother Reggie, slipping out at night and coming back with bloodshot eyes and empty promises. Eli learned early that life didn't hand out favors. He was the quiet one, eyes always scanning, ears always listening. He stayed away from trouble not because he was afraid, but because he understood the cost. He saw what the streets did to people, how it took dreams and crumpled them like paper. His neighborhood didn't raise boys into men. It hardened them or buried them. His escape came at 15, under the glow of a flickering television screen. A grainy VHS of Saving Private Ryan played in a borrowed VCR, and something shifted in him. It wasn't the action or the explosions. It was the brotherhood, the sacrifice, the idea that maybe, just maybe, there was a world where someone like him could be more than just a statistic. That night he made a decision. By 18, Eli enlisted in the U.S. Army. It wasn't easy. The recruiter looked him up and down like he'd seen 1,000 Elijahs before. Black from the inner city, carrying more weight in his eyes than in his duffel. But Eli didn't flinch. He passed every test, ran every mile, and when he shipped out to basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia, he left behind not just his home, but the version of himself that the city had tried to define. The military molded Eli into something sharper. He rose quickly, driven not by ambition but by purpose. His squad called him Ghost, not because he was quiet, but because he moved like one. In Afghanistan, he led missions that saved lives. In Iraq, he earned a Bronze Star for pulling a wounded medic out of gunfire with a shattered arm. His name was whispered with respect in halls where few men of color were ever recognized. Still, he never bragged. Never asked for medals or attention. He just did the job. But the job came at a cost. In 2008, during a routine patrol in Kandahar, Eli's unit was ambushed. The blast took the life of two of his closest friends and left Eli pinned beneath rubble for hours. He survived, but something in him didn't. The doctors called it PTSD, nightmares, flashbacks, cold sweats that soaked the sheets. Eli called it the weight. When he returned home, he was different. The cheers at the airport faded fast, replaced by job interviews that went nowhere and VA clinics that left him waiting for hours, only to be handed pills and pamphlets. The system he'd once believed in, the one he'd nearly died for, felt like it had no space for him anymore. His mother passed from a stroke in 2011. Reggie was already gone, lost to the streets years earlier. Eli tried to find work, odd jobs, here and there, but nothing stuck. Employers didn't understand the silence in his eyes or why he needed to sit near exits in restaurants. Some called him unstable. Others just didn't call back. His savings dwindled. His apartment disappeared. And before long, the Bronze Star was tucked into the same duffel that now held all his worldly possessions. He moved, from shelter to shelter, couch to couch, park bench to underpass. Sometimes people gave him change. Sometimes they crossed the street. No one saw the soldier. No one saw the hero. Just a homeless black man with a scar above his eye and a coat too heavy for the season. But through it all, Eli never lost his discipline. He woke up before sunrise, every day. He read the paper when he could get it. He kept his boots clean, his belongings folded, his mind as sharp as he could manage. He didn't drink, didn't beg, just survived. Quietly, invisibly. And though the world forgot him, he never forgot his oath. To protect, to serve, even when no one was watching. There were moments, fleeting and fragile, when kindness found him. A retired teacher named Mrs. Langston, who'd bring him hot coffee and fresh socks on Tuesdays. A kid named Marcus who once handed him a peanut butter sandwich and said, "You look like you used to be someone important." Eli smiled at that. Just once, because deep down he had been, and maybe, despite everything, he still was. But how do you convince a world that's already judged you? How do you reclaim a story when no one even remembers you had one? That morning on the sidewalk in South Baltimore, the one with the newspaper and the worn photo in his pocket, Eli had no idea anything was about to change. He wasn't looking for redemption. He wasn't waiting for rescue. He was just existing. But fate doesn't knock. Sometimes it sends two officers and a question. And sometimes, when the timing is right, the past walks straight into the present, demanding to be seen. At first, it howls. It kicks up storms in your chest, steals your breath in the middle of the night, sends tremors through your hands when you try to hold a cup of coffee still. But after a while, months, maybe years, it just becomes part of you. Like an echo, in your bones. A dull, ever-present hum. That was what life became for Eli Turner, a long, quiet ache. After the police officers left that morning, still whispering about the discovery they'd made, Eli sat back down on the bench and opened the paper again. He read the same paragraph 5 times, and still couldn't tell you what it said. Not because he couldn't read, but because his mind had already started folding in on itself again. He hadn't asked them for anything. Not recognition, not pity, not help. They came to him, and now his chest was tight with the familiar dread that follows unwanted attention. He'd been here before, not with cops or photos, but with hope. Hope, for Eli, was dangerous. It's what made him believe the VA counselor when she said she'd call next week. It's what made him clean himself up for job interviews that ended in forced smiles and rejections. It's what made him stand in the back of churches, listening for sermons he could no longer feel. Hope was a loaded weapon, with a faulty safety, and every time he dared to believe something could change, it misfired. He spent the rest of the day drifting. The city was buzzing with weekend traffic, street vendors, honking cars. But for Eli, it all moved in silence. He didn't beg, didn't panhandle, didn't talk unless someone talked to him first. The world passed by him like he was a ghost. And maybe, in a way, he was. He made his way to the underpass by Druid Hill Park before dusk. That night, like most, he slept with his back against the wall, duffel tucked beneath him. Every sound, the crunch of footsteps, the distant thud of bass from a passing car, snapped his eyes open. He never fully slept, just rested, half awake. Ready. That was the part nobody talked about, the exhaustion of always being on. The fight or flight that never left, even years after the battlefield had changed. He wasn't ducking bullets anymore, but he was still dodging danger. Street violence, hunger, cold, loneliness, and the worst one, memory. He was in the VA office, again. Another white-walled room that smelled like sanitizer and old files. A young intern sat behind a desk, tapping away at a keyboard. "Your file says you served 2 tours?" she asked without looking up. "3, Eli said quietly. "Oh. Right. Okay." She clicked a few more keys. "So what brings you in today?" He looked at her, long and hard. "I can't sleep," he said. "I don't eat. I get headaches. I flinch when a door slams. I haven't worked in over a year. My hands shake, my back hurts, I don't trust anyone, I get angry fast, His voice caught. She looked up. "I don't feel right." For a moment she nodded, like she understood, like she cared. Then she handed him a pamphlet titled 10 Steps to Coping with Anxiety, told him to try meditation, suggested a support group on Wednesdays if he could get a ride. The appointment lasted 17 minutes. When he walked out, he didn't look back. Eli tried again and again to pull his life together. He picked up a warehouse job in 2012, working graveyard shifts loading trucks. It didn't pay much, but it was something. He was quiet, on time, reliable. Then one night, a loud bang from a falling crate sent him into a spiral. He ducked, screamed, tackled a coworker thinking it was an enemy. He had no memory of it, just the aftermath. He was let go the next day. He walked home with shaking hands and blood pounding in his ears. That was the first time he stood on the bridge, staring down at the water below, wondering if it might be easier to just disappear. But something pulled him back. Maybe guilt, maybe instinct, maybe just sheer defiance. Eli didn't. No, he just knew he wasn't ready. Not yet. In 2014, he got into a shelter downtown. They had beds, hot meals, and a caseworker who genuinely tried to help. Her name was Joy, and she had eyes like weathered stone, kind but heavy with the weight of seeing too many broken men. She took an interest in Eli, helped him get into a transitional housing program, got his benefits restarted, helped him file for VA compensation again. For a few weeks, he started to believe things might be turning around. Then came the fight. A younger man, half drunk and looking for trouble, pushed Eli in the cafeteria line, called him old man, called him washed up. Said the army didn't mean anything in the real world, Eli snapped. He didn't hit him, but the look in his eyes, the pure, unfiltered rage, was enough to get him kicked out. No violence, the shelter manager had said. 0 tolerance. Joy tried to fight for him, but policy was policy. Back on the streets took more than just his shelter. They took pieces of his soul, bit by bit. There were winters where he wrapped himself in trash bags under his coat to stay warm. Nights when he fought rats for space near heating vents. Days when the hunger gnawed so loud he couldn't think straight. And always that deep, bone-deep shame. It wasn't just about being homeless. It was about feeling like a failure, like everything he'd fought for, bled for, meant nothing. People looked at him with pity, or disgust, or worse, indifference. Nobody saw the medals, the years of service, the friends he buried, the nightmares that clawed at his mind like wolves. They just saw a man on a bench, a problem to avoid, a body to step around. One night in 2016, Eli found himself standing outside, a diner watching a couple laugh over pancakes at 2 a.m. through the window. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. His stomach felt like it was folding in on itself. The cook inside saw him and motioned for security. Eli turned away before the guard even opened the door. That night, he didn't cry. He hadn't cried in years. Not when Reggie died. Not when his mother passed. Not even when he found an old photo of his unit buried at the bottom of his duffel, still smelling faintly of smoke and sand. But that night, on the cold concrete of an alleyway near North Avenue, something broke in him. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a small, invisible crack, the kind that doesn't heal. He stopped going to shelters after that. Stopped talking to people. Trust was a luxury he could no longer afford. He kept to himself, stayed under the radar, kept his distance from the other homeless men, many of whom were battling demons of their own. Addiction, schizophrenia, rage. Some had weapons. Some didn't need them. Eli learned to survive in silence. He memorized the best places to find food. The hours the library was open so he could sit somewhere warm. The churches that didn't ask questions when he walked in, just to listen. He became invisible by design. But invisibility is a double-edged sword. Because after a while, you start to wonder if maybe the world's right. Maybe you are nobody. That brings us back to the bench, to the folded newspaper, to the faded photo in his coat pocket that he looked at only when he needed to remember he was real. He didn't carry it for nostalgia. He carried it to remind himself he existed. That once, he mattered. That once, he saved lives. That once, he was somebody. Now he just floated through a city that didn't even know his name. But life has a strange way of circling back. And sometimes when you're at your lowest, when you're convinced nothing good will ever happen again, the universe throws you a rope, not a shiny golden one, a rough frayed rope, hard to see, easy to miss, but strong enough to pull you out, if you're willing to hold on. That rope came in the form of those two officers. Not because they rescued him, but because they saw him, really saw him. Not just a black man on the street, not just a homeless vet, but a human being with a history, a story, a name. And for the first time in a long, long time, Eli didn't feel invisible, but feeling seen. That's only the beginning. The real battle was still ahead. Because seeing yourself again, after years of believing you don't matter, that's the hardest fight of all. For a few days after that morning with the officers, Eli expected things to go back to how they'd always been, silent, cold, predictable. But something had shifted in the air. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was real. On the third morning after the encounter, he was back at his usual bench in the park when a white van with City of Baltimore Veterans Outreach stenciled on the side pulled up beside him. A woman stepped out, tall, brown skin, hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had the kind of expression that said she didn't come to waste time. "Elijah Turner?" she asked, clipboard in hand. He looked up slowly, unsure whether to speak or run. "My name's Maya Ellis," she said, crouching slightly to meet his eye level. "I'm with a reintegration program for displaced veterans. Someone passed your name to me." He didn't respond. She didn't waver. "You don't have to do anything, but we'd love to help you. There's a transitional housing unit with open beds, hot food, mental health services, a clean place to sleep." Eli stared at her. He wanted to believe her, but life had taught him to look for the trap in every offer. "Why now?" he finally asked. She didn't blink. "Because you were forgotten. And you shouldn't have been." A long pause. Then for the first time in a very long time, Eli nodded. The room was small. Bare white walls, a narrow bed and a locker, but it felt like luxury. The shower water ran hot. The sheets smelled like detergent. There were no rats, no shouting, no need to sleep with one eye open. Eli stood under the running water for a full 10 minutes, letting it hit his skin, scalding and real. When he stepped out and caught a glimpse of himself in the mirror, beard overgrown, eyes tired, body lean and marked by time, he barely recognized the man looking back. But beneath the rough edges, there was something else. Something waiting. It was no longer about surviving. Now it was about rebuilding. Eli started with silence. He attended the therapy groups but didn't speak for the first 2 sessions. Just listened. sat in the back, took mental notes, watched other veterans, some older, some younger, talk about the things that kept them up at night. The gunfire, in their dreams, the guilt they carried, the memories they couldn't outrun. He realized then that he wasn't alone, that his pain wasn't unique, and that maybe, just maybe, talking about it didn't make you weak. So one Thursday morning he raised his hand. "My name is Eli," he said quietly, "and I haven't felt alive in years." No one clapped. No one gasped. But the counselor nodded, and another vet across the circle gave him a single knowing nod in return. Progress was slow, uneven. Some days were good. Others were a grind. He met with Maya weekly. She wasn't just a caseworker. She became his advocate, his mirror, his anchor. She helped him reapply for VA benefits, this time with the right documentation and a whole team backing him. She walked him through resume building, skills assessments, and even helped him secure a donated suit from a local charity. It wasn't just about paperwork. It was about learning to believe again, in structure, in self-worth, in possibility. One morning, over coffee in the community room, she handed him a brochure. "Security training program," she said. "You have experience. It's part-time to start. Paid." Eli stared at the brochure like it was written in another language. He hadn't held a real job in almost a decade. But Maya leaned in. "You're not starting over, Eli. You're just picking up where you left off." He didn't respond right away, but he took the brochure and folded it neatly into his pocket. That afternoon he applied. Not military, private security. A crisp navy polo, a clean badge clipped to his belt. It was a night shift at a shipping yard near the inner harbor. Quiet. Work. Watchful work. He liked it. It reminded him of his army days. Not the chaos, but the order, the routine, the mission. Every night, he walked the perimeter with a flashlight in hand and purpose in his step. He took pride in being reliable, dependable, present. The job paid just enough to cover rent on a studio apartment subsidized by the Veterans Program. The first night he slept there, surrounded by 4 walls he could call his own, Eli stood in the center of the room for nearly 20 minutes in silence. Then he laughed, not loudly, just a quiet, disbelieving chuckle that rose from somewhere deep. He was still standing. It was a Saturday morning when Maya handed him a sealed envelope. "Remember that photo you showed the officers?" she asked. He nodded. "Well, we tracked it. Turns out you were featured in a local news piece back in 2006, after you saved that medic. The story got buried over time, but we dug it up. One of the guys from your unit reached out." Eli's heart stuttered. She nodded, grinning. "He wants to talk. Says he never stopped looking for you." Inside the envelope was a letter, handwritten, familiar scrawl. "If you're reading this, it means they found you. I've spent years wondering where you went. You saved my life, more than once. We all thought you'd come home and do great things. I know life doesn't always go how we planned, but if you're out there and you still have fight in you, I'd love to reconnect. You're my brother, man. Always were." Rodriguez. Eli sat down hard. He hadn't thought about Rodriguez in years. The medic he dragged from the wreckage, the one who cried when they gave Eli the Bronze Star, the one who always joked that Eli had 9 lives and a death stare. He wrote back that night. The following month, Rodriguez came to visit. They met at a diner, Eli's idea. This time, no one chased him off. They talked for hours about war, about loss, about what it meant to come home and not recognize the world or yourself. Rodriguez, now a firefighter in North Carolina, hugged him before he left. "You're still here, man," he said, voice thick. "That's what matters." Eli nodded, eyes stinging, and in that moment something unlocked in him. Not just survival, not just routine, but purpose. Not just in therapy, but at veteran events, local meetings, high schools, community centers. He told his story, not the cleaned-up version, the real one. He talked about sleeping under bridges, about losing everything, about what it feels like to be forgotten, and what it takes to climb back. People listened. Some cried, many thanked him. And for the first time in years, Eli felt something stronger than pain. He felt heard. It was Maya who suggested the next step. "There's a fellowship opening up," she said one afternoon. "Veteran-to-veteran advocacy. You'd work with others going through what you did. Help them find housing, support, jobs." Eli hesitated. "I'm not qualified." She shook her head. "You're exactly what they need. Not because you're perfect, but because you understand. You lived it." He applied. He got it. He walked with other veterans through the dark, not above them, beside them. He knew what to say, when to be quiet, when to push. He helped dozens off the street, helped them believe again. And every time he handed someone a hot meal, or a bus pass, or just sat with them in silence, he remembered the bench, the photo, the moment his life tilted toward hope. Eli still wore the bronze star from time to time, not to boast, but to remind himself where he came from, to remind others that honor doesn't vanish when the war ends, that bravery doesn't always look like charging into bullets. Sometimes it looks like getting up one more time than you fall. The crowd was small, but the moment was big. He stood at the podium in a simple gray suit and looked out at the faces, young, old, uniformed, civilian. "My name is Elijah Turner," he began. "I served this country, and for a long time, I thought that was the end of my story, that I'd be another name no one remembered." He paused. "But I was wrong." Another pause. "Because I remember. I remember who I am. I remember my brothers. I remember the wait, and I remember the climb." He looked at the folded photo tucked in his breast pocket. "And now I help others remember too." The crowd rose in quiet applause. Somewhere in the back, Maya wiped her eyes, and Eli smiled. Not the tight-lipped smirk he used to get through hard days. A real smile. Because for the first time in years, he wasn't just surviving. He was living, and more than that, he was leading others home. The applause still rang in Eli's ears as he stepped down from the stage that Veterans Day morning. It wasn't just clapping, it was affirmation. It was a standing ovation for a man who had once believed he'd never be seen again. Now, not only was he seen, he was celebrated. The ceremony was held at the city's central plaza, a space often reserved for parades and mayoral announcements. But today it belonged to the forgotten warriors, the voices once silenced by trauma and circumstance. And Eli Turner had just become their symbol of possibility. As he shook hands with the mayor, a firm, two-handed grip that lingered just a moment too long, Eli knew something had fundamentally changed. Not just in the way people looked at him, but in how he saw himself. No longer a man living in the shadows of his past, Eli had stepped fully into the light of his present, and it was bright. The video of his speech, filmed by a high school student in attendance, went viral within 48 hours. Local news stations picked it up, then national networks. "Bronze Star hero rebuilds life and lifts others along the way," the headlines read. He was invited to appear on morning talk shows, to speak at community colleges and military academies, to be interviewed by journalists who suddenly wanted to know everything about the man who had risen from rock bottom to become a lighthouse for others. But Eli never let the attention swell his ego. Fame wasn't what he craved. Impact was. With each opportunity, he returned to one thing: the mission. His mission now wasn't about combat zones and commands. It was about dignity, healing, and reconnection. And he was relentless in pursuing. It started as a non-profit designed to help displaced veterans reintegrate into society, but quickly evolved into something more powerful: a movement. Second Tour offered housing, job training, therapy, and community support. But its true strength was in its leadership, almost entirely composed of veterans who, like Eli, had fought their own demons and won. They didn't speak from theory. They spoke from lived truth. The office was modest, just 2 rooms in a repurposed warehouse in East Baltimore, but the energy inside was electric. Eli ran daily briefings, met with clients, checked in with team members. He wasn't just the founder. He was a caseworker, a coach, a mentor, a brother in arms to anyone who walked through that door, and people came from up and down the East Coast. Word had spread. If you were a vet struggling to find your way, Eli Turner was the man to see. After a decade as a firefighter, he was ready for a new chapter. The two of them created a mentorship program called The Long Walk Home, pairing struggling vets with those who had successfully reintegrated. Rodriguez handled operations. Eli handled the heart. Together, they built something that neither war nor trauma could destroy. Family. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to form deep, authentic connections. He made friends, joined a rec basketball league for veterans, took long walks with Maya on weekends, sometimes in silence, sometimes in laughter. Their bond deepened into something more, something real. It began quietly, sharing a meal here, a conversation there. One night, after a particularly difficult day at the center, Eli walked Maya to her car. She paused before getting in. "You're doing more than saving lives, Eli," she said. "You're rewriting your own." He looked at her, eyes soft, steady. "I couldn't have done it without you." Then, as naturally as breath, he leaned in, a kiss, gentle, honest, full of all the words they'd never said. From that night forward, they were a team in every way. He started journaling again, something he hadn't done since his deployment days. The entries began as reflections, then expanded into essays. Eventually, he compiled them into a manuscript. The title? Falling Forward. One Soldier's Journey Back to Life. Publishers fought over it. The book was released to critical acclaim, raw, powerful, and painfully honest. It made the New York Times bestseller list and was adopted by military transition programs across the country. Veterans wrote to him by the thousands. One letter read, "I was about to end it all, then I read your story. Now I'm getting help. Thank you for staying alive long enough to help me save myself." Eli wept when he read that one. He kept it in his wallet. Eli was invited to Capitol Hill to testify before a bipartisan committee on veteran homelessness. Standing in a tailored suit, he spoke not as a politician or an academic, but as a man who had lived the crisis. "Veterans don't fail the system," he said, voice unwavering. "The system fails them. We need fewer photo ops and more beds, less bureaucracy and more compassion." His testimony led to the passing of the Homefront Bill, which allocated increased federal funding for transitional housing and mental health services for veterans. One congressman approached him afterward and said, "You may have just saved more lives than you ever did in combat." He still spent weekends at the park bench where it all started. Not because he needed to, but because someone else always did. He'd bring coffee and sit beside vets who were still where he once was, cold, scared, invisible. "I know it feels like it'll never change," he'd say, "but I'm living, proof that it can." Sometimes that was enough. Eli had reclaimed his identity. He no longer flinched when someone said his name. He no longer avoided mirrors. He no longer felt like a ghost in his own story. Instead, he had become the author, rewriting the narrative with every act of service, every word of hope, every life lifted from the margins. His trauma hadn't disappeared. The nightmares still came, but they no longer controlled him. They were part of his tapestry, not the whole cloth, and in accepting them, he found power. Baltimore declared July 18th, Elijah Turner Day, honoring not just his service, but his resilience and leadership. A mural was painted near the waterfront, his silhouette in uniform surrounded by phrases like courage, hope, and second chances. He didn't cry when he saw it. He stood tall, took a deep breath, and nodded once. "I'm still here," he whispered. Still fighting, still rising. Second tour expanded to multiple cities. Eli mentored a new generation of leaders, young, passionate veterans with fire in their hearts. He stepped back from day-to-day operations but remained its soul. He spent his time traveling, speaking, writing. Not for ego, for purpose. He visited prisons, halfway houses, schools, any place where someone needed to hear, "You're not broken, you're becoming." And people listened. Because when Eli spoke, it wasn't just words. It was truth. It was lived experience. It was the echo of someone who'd been to the edge and chose to step back. It was early morning. Mist hovered low. The bench was empty. He sat down and pulled out the old weathered photo, him in uniform crouched beside a tank, holding the hand of the medic he'd rescued. He ran a thumb over its edges. Then he pulled out another photo, this one recent, him standing on a stage surrounded by dozens of veterans he'd helped guide home, two versions of the same man. 2 lifetimes, same heart, same fire. He smiled, not because the journey was easy, but because it was worth it. It's forged in pain, refined in purpose, sustained by action. Elijah Turner didn't just survive his story, he rewrote it, and in doing so he helped countless others reclaim theirs. He is not just a veteran, a hero, or a leader. He is a living testament to the truth that even in our darkest moments the capacity for light remains. And sometimes the most powerful victories aren't won on the battlefield. They're won within. Eli Turner's story isn't just a story of survival. It's a blueprint for what's possible when pain meets purpose. He didn't have a miracle moment. He had a decision. A choice to stand up one more time, to believe that the ashes of yesterday could still ignite a fire for tomorrow. We all have battles, even if they don't look like Eli's. Maybe yours isn't fought in a war zone, but in a hospital room, a lonely apartment, a courtroom, or a quiet, sleepless night. Maybe you've faced your own kind of darkness, the kind that whispers, "This is the end." But Eli's life proves that it never has to be. The truth is, transformation doesn't start with a headline or a viral video. It starts with a moment. One moment of courage, one breath, one decision to reach for something better. And if Eli could do it, after the war, the streets, the shame, then maybe you can too. So here's your call to action. If you're struggling, don't suffer in silence. Reach out. There are people, maybe even reading this beside you, who've walked a road like yours. You are not alone. If you know someone who's hurting, be their turning point. A word of encouragement, a warm meal, a hand on their shoulder, it could change their life like Rodriguez changed Eli's. And if you've already come through your own fire, use your story. Don't wait for a perfect platform. Be a mentor. Share your scars. Help someone else find their way home. Because every one of us has the power to be someone else's second chance. Eli Turner didn't become a hero when he wore the uniform. He became a hero when he used his wounds to heal others. So maybe today is your turning point. Maybe this isn't just the end of a story. It's the beginning of your own. Stand up. Speak out. Start again.